Are you competitive in how you think about and relate to other people? Are you always trying to take advantage of someone else, to get the best of other people? Do you play politics to get an advantage over others? And by the way, there is politics in the church. There's politics in any church. If you got two people, you got politics. And we don't need to lie to ourselves and pretend that politics doesn't exist in any organization. We should, though, engage in any activity with proper motives. Any decisions that are made should be made from the proper motives and without unfair preferences or favor being shown for reasons that are not valid. God is no respecter of persons. But even in churches, and you might say often, especially in churches, people play politics to gain advantage over others, to get a position. Sometimes the people in charge will promote someone or give someone an office because it is to their advantage from a political standpoint. Perhaps this person is someone that does them favors or has money and they believe that they can gain that person's loyalty by giving them an office so they can get more of their money or whatever, rather than how effective is this or that person going to be in serving in a given office, and how well are people going to be served by that person if he is made a deacon, for example, or an elder or whatever. All of these things come into play in relation to envy, and so we can examine our motives. Why is it that we do the things that we do? Are we doing things so that we can maneuver ourselves into a position so that we can get an office, we can get recognition, we can be promoted over others, we can gain status in the organization? If that's the motive, then that's not love. Love does not parade itself, we're told. The Greek word is periperiomai, and it implies boasting of oneself or putting the self on display. Putting the self on display. I was thinking about when I was going over this, all of the selfies that people take these days. That's one of the big rages now is for people to take pictures of themselves and then post the pictures out there on Facebook or somewhere for the whole world to see. Now, there's a balance here, and I'm not saying anybody on Facebook is violating this principle. I don't believe that necessarily, but the fact is that we see people parading themselves, and that is just one way that people do that. They parade themselves, and they have these websites where they display themselves. They put themselves on display. Now, as I said, there's a balance here, and it's not wrong to communicate using social media to communicate with your friends and so forth, as long as it's done properly. and with the proper motive, but nevertheless, often it is not done properly. And people do like to boast and brag and talk about all of the things that they have done. People, again, sometimes the reason they give money to the church or they give money to charity is so they can brag and boast about how much money they gave. It's not really to help other people or to serve God, but to be able to have something they can brag about. For some people, Christianity or even life itself is all pretense. They are putting on a show, playing a role to impress others. And there's little or nothing that is really genuine in their conduct and behavior. Their concern is only or almost only for themselves. And I believe not all, but many politicians fit that description. They're not seeking public office out of humility and a real desire to serve others in a humble way, but often it is to put themselves on display. And it is for what they can gain from having an office. Abusers, people who are serial abusers, are very commonly people who put on a public face that is nothing like what they are inside. They put themselves on display and they make themselves out to be something that they are not. And often they go to church or they're active in the community and they are respected and looked up to because they're putting on an act. But they're completely different when they're at home mistreating their wives or children. And if anybody that hears this happens to be an abuser or just a phony, you need to repent. You need to quit thinking of yourself all the time and begin to learn to genuinely love other people. And life is not only a lot simpler if you're not a phony or a fake, but it is also much more rewarding for everybody concerned. And no abuser, by the way, will be in God's kingdom. Paul said love is not puffed up. The Greek word is phesao, and it implies arrogance and pride. You might ask yourself, how do you rate yourself in comparison to other people? Do you think that you are somehow better than others? And this can not only apply on an individual basis, but even a lot of racism is based on the idea that one race is somehow better than another. And people of various, whatever race it might be, are to be looked down on. And they are to be hated or despised, or they are to be subjugated or enslaved. And this has happened many times throughout history, still happening today. Do you think that somehow you're just inherently better than other people? If you do, you need to understand that you are not better than anyone else. No individual from God's perspective is better than any other individual. And no race is better than any other race. And anytime we begin thinking that we are better than others, then we need to understand that that attitude is sin. That attitude of arrogance is sin. God hates arrogance, pride. Now, you may be good at certain things. You may be better at doing certain things. You may have certain talents that other people don't have. God-given talents. Where did you get those talents? God gave them to you. Maybe you work to develop those talents, but still, without what God gave to you, you wouldn't have any talent. You wouldn't even exist, for that matter. And no doubt, not only God, but others were instrumental too in helping you develop those talents. You may have accomplished certain things in life more than other people have accomplished. But none of those things is an excuse for arrogance and pride. We're told in the scripture, God resists the proud but gives grace to the humble. God resists the proud but gives grace to the humble, James 4 and verse 6. Love is not puffed up. It is not arrogant. It does not look down its nose at other people. What we need to do is forget about ourselves and learn to appreciate the worth and value of others. No matter what another person's status or station in life is, we need to appreciate that person for his own individual qualities. We're told in Philippians chapter 2 and verse 3, Philippians chapter 2 and verse 3, let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem others better than himself. Let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem others better than himself. And this is an aspect of love. In verse 5 of 1 Corinthians 13, Paul wrote that love does not behave rudely, does not seek its own, is not provoked, thinks no evil. Love does not behave rudely, as it's put in the New King James. In the King James Version, it does not behave unseemly. And the Greek word implies to behave in a way that is unbecoming, which could be manifested as rudeness or unseemly or inappropriate behavior. It could include many variations of inappropriate conduct, perhaps wearing immodest clothing, or clothing that does not reflect proper values would be one way that this would apply. Any number of inappropriate behaviors could be mentioned as violating the principle of divine love. So we need to think about what we're doing and its potential effect on other people. Is what we are doing edifying? Does it promote godliness? Or is it something that is unbecoming? Love, it says, does not seek its own. That is, love is not selfish and inward. Godly love is outgoing. It is not inward. Now, there are those who, in this me generation, who have encouraged people to love themselves as though people didn't love themselves anyway, and talk constantly about loving oneself. Some theorists have had the idea that the reason people do criminal acts is because they just don't love themselves enough. Or they misbehave, children misbehave because they lack self-love or self-esteem. And people have depression and other problems because they don't love themselves enough. The problem, more likely, is they love themselves too much, or they don't love others enough. Godly love is not selfish and inward, it is outgoing. It does not seek its own. It is not directed inwardly. It is directed outwardly toward God and toward other people. You know, Jesus, when Jesus was asked the question, what is the great commandment? He didn't say the great commandment is love yourself. He did say love your neighbor as yourself, implying that the fact you're going to love yourself is a given. But it's not a given that you're going to love God and love other people. So, when we are focused on loving God, that is something that is outgoing toward God. We need to think about how can I demonstrate that love toward God? What can I do to show God that I do love Him? How can I serve God? In terms of loving other people, what can I do to give to and serve other people? How can I behave in a manner that is going to benefit them, that will promote their well-being, that will serve them? Because love is not seeking its own, it is serving others, beginning with God. How can I give to my mate? How can I give to my children, my parents, my siblings, my extended family, my neighbors, my community? How can I make the world a better place? Love is not provoked. And so we need to ask ourselves, how easily am I provoked? Am I a person that flies off the handle at everything that displeases me? Or if someone says something, makes a catty remark, or something that could be interpreted as a cutting remark, do I become provoked? Am I ready to lash out and to get back at anyone I perceive as being a threat or doing something harmful toward me? And that goes with also what it says here, thinks no evil. The Greek implies keeping an account of evil or harboring resentment. Do you harbor resentment? Do you keep an account of slights and insults that people have done to you and then figure out ways to get back at them in sort of a tit-for-tat game of getting vengeance on others who you believe have done you wrong in some way? Do you harbor resentment and bitterness toward people who have insulted you or done something that you feel was offensive? That's not love.